So did grandma keep her job during all this time?
Yes. In
Okay.
fact, she got promoted and promoted and promoted to the point where when President Ferdinand Marcos was first elected to be president of the Philippines, my mother started to get promoted, mainly because my father, while he was going to the University of the Philippines, was very good friends with the powers that be, by the sons and daughters of the wealthy Filipinos who were the movers and shakers at the time. In fact, my godfather, and no one would be impressed by this, but maybe your Filipino listeners would be impressed. But my godfather was Eduardo Cuanco, or Danding Cuanco.
Welcome to the Part Filipino Podcast. My name's Leland Fox, your half-Filipino host. If that name means something to you, let me know in the comments, because that might mean that you are Filipino, just like my mom. I've done now 10 episodes of this podcast, and I probably brought my mom up in each one of them, and I've mentioned that my mom grew up in Manila. And now that it's been 10 episodes, some of you are probably starting to think, I wonder if this guy really even has a mom, because she hasn't shown up yet in this podcast. Well, today is the day. I am interviewing my mom about her experience growing up in Manila. I personally think it's a pretty sweet interview. You know what else I think is also pretty sweet? Haw flakes. Although it has been reported that haw flakes are sometimes banned for improper use of red dye, haw flakes are nevertheless a delicious red disc of delightful haw, whatever that is. If your life is in need of a little more sweetness, try haw flakes today. Welcome to the Part Filipino Podcast, the podcast for people who aren't quite sure if they actually count as Filipino. My name is Leland Fox, and I'm half Filipino. I hope you'll join me as I explore what it means to be part Filipino.
Jello!
Hi. Hi.
Okay,
Yeah.
Now what are we going to talk about?
So I'd be interested to go back as far as you can remember in, your grandparents, parents, and just kind of go over who were they, what did they do, what are some memories of them? Or I guess give us a cast of characters first.
Cast of characters. Okay, so my papa is his name is Enrique Soliesta de Rama, and the De Ramas are from Quezon province in the city of Tayabas. So they speak Tagalog in that area. My mother is Priscilla Veloira, or Priscilla Espiritu Veloira, and they are from Bulacan, and they speak Tagalog as well. However, my father also grew up in Negros and Iloilo because his mother, my grandmother, Dolores Soliesta, was from Iloilo, in a place called Santa Barbara. And so they speak a different dialect. I don't even want to, it's not even a dialect, it's really a language. And so my grandmother spoke Hiligaynon or Ilonggo. So my father grew up bilingual, speaking both Tagalog and Ilonggo, as well as English and Japanese, because around the time that he was born, so 1931 or 1932, so by the time he was maybe 13, the Philippines was already under Japanese occupation. And so he was for some reason left behind in Manila while his parents fled to Tayabas. I don't know the circumstances or the details behind that, but he was all alone.
When would that have been?
during the occupation, about 1941, 42.
Oh, okay.
And so he worked in the Japanese garrison as a kitchen boy, where he was also, beaten and abused by the Japanese. And towards the end of the Japanese occupation, when they were when the battle in Manila, the Japanese wanted to kill all of the Filipinos who were living in the garrison, and my father escaped. So that's how he escaped death. And somehow he found his way back to his parents. So that was a very interesting story for me anyway, because then I understood why the whys and wherefores of my father's trauma, because there was a lot of trauma involved. But
Did he tell you how he did he get in the details of how he
the
escaped?
only detail I know is that his grandfather, my great grandfather, was killed by Filipino guerrillas,
Mm.
los guerrillas Filipinos. And so he was beheaded because
What?
they thought, yeah, he was beheaded
Oh.
because they thought he was a Japanese sympathizer, which he really was. Not in an active way, but because he was a teacher, he had to learn Japanese to be able to teach children, because the Japanese wanted the children to learn Japanese.
Mm.
And
What
so,
was his name?
oh, I knew you were going to ask me this. I
Was
can't
it?
remember. I can't remember, but I would remember. I remember in a minute.
Yeah. I'm
Like,
pulling up the app.
pull up the app.
So it would have been either Felix
Yes.
or Eusebio.
No, it would be. I don't think it was Was it Felix? I think it was
Oh,
Felix.
yeah, he passed away in 1943, so that'd be the right year.
Yes. Yes. He passed away in 1940. He was young, relatively young. And yeah, they beheaded him because they thought, but then again, a lot of Filipinos also thought that, because, that we had 300 years of Spanish rule, we didn't like that. The Spaniards really kind of mistreated us, but in a way, they also did a lot of good things, But in any case, they thought that a lot of Filipinos in that area thought that if we're going to lose the war, we might as well lose to an Asian nation instead of another white nation. Because, there's the Americans were there and they were involved in the World War II. And some Filipinos didn't want to have anything to do with that because, of course, because of the battle, the first battle in the towards 1898, towards the 1900s, when there was a battle against the Americans. And the
Right.
Americans massacred thousands of Filipinos, men, women, and children. And this is usually not in your history books, but that's exactly what happened. And so a lot of Filipinos were not very happy about the Americans until, of course, the Japanese came, World War II. And the Japanese were really savage. They were really savage. I don't want to say just the Japanese, because there were also many Koreans who were conscripted soldiers, and they were pretty brutal as well. So
yeah, I got Ruben's book.
Yeah,
that he wrote. Oh, not
my
this
stepfather.
One. Yeah. He talks about the Japanese and how he hated them.
Yes.
And I was also watching, like, on YouTube, there's like this really old debate, like high school debates from like I guess it would have been the 50s.
Right.
But yeah, it's high schoolers, and one of the high schoolers was talking about prejudice towards the Japanese, how it still prevails from the treatment of World War II.
Well, is it fair to ask you whether you have any prejudices? Well, I guess so, Mrs. Waller. And being brutally frank, I am, I'm prejudiced against Japanese. Well, not to the extent that I hate them. No, not that way. But I got this, well, as a result of World War II. Because, well, I guess I was yet too young to understand what happened during those times. But I think that what my relatives and friends and the people who were witness to that unfaithful occasion, well, they just more than justify the fact. And I think it's justified for me to feel the same way because, well, I know that my people suffered very much under that rule.
Yes, absolutely. They were pretty brutal in the way they killed people. I mean, at least at least the Spaniards, used their guns.
Uh-huh.
But the Japanese, they knew how to torture, and they killed men, women, and children. Not that the Spaniards didn't do that, but not in. I mean, the Japanese were pretty well known for that. Not to demonize them or anything, but World War II really brought a lot of changes in, let's just say it was a paradigm shift. They used to be like these warlords, and after the war and then the atomic bomb, that changed. So when I was growing up, we learned that the Japanese were cool people. I mean, I learned to sing the Japanese national anthem in grade school.
Oh, really?
Yes, I can still sing it. And so I don't think Filipinos want to propagate so much hatred. We're pretty resilient, and we have a lot of forbearance. I think that's part of the culture. But my father, after the war, of course, went back to school, and he went to a school called Philippine Christian College, Union
Was this
High
in
School in
was
Manila.
this in Manila? Okay. So but
And
you said he found his parents,
yes.
reunited with them, and was that in Manila then?
Oh, in Tayabas and also in Manila. They my grandparents were, I for some reason I don't really know the details of why, but they traveled a lot. They owned properties in Manila and in Palawan and Puerto Princesa, and also in Negros. They owned the beachfront
Hmm.
property before the war. And also, well, in Tayabas, in Quezon, of course, they owned land there. And so they lived in those places, and they worked as teachers. Now, my grandfather, Pedro, went to law school
Hmm.
in a Far Eastern University, but he decided not to finish because he got involved in other businesses.
Oh, okay.
So that's what happened. But my father went to this, it's a Protestant school. Actually, I think it's Methodist, Philippine Christian College High School. And yeah, he went to high school in Manila. My mother, on the other hand, went to high school in Bulacan, in San Rafael, Bulacan, or what they call Baliwag, Bulacan. And my father and mother met almost 9 years after the war, and they met at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños. That would be south of where the main campus is. Main campus of the University of the Philippines is in Quezon City, but they also have a campus in Los Baños, which is south of Manila. And that campus at the time was pretty well known for agriculture and other animal sciences. And my mother was a professor at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños. She was a graduate of the University of the Philippines in the main campus in Quezon City, and she was a home economics major. So when she went to University of the Philippines in Los Baños, she was a professor of home economics. Meanwhile, my father was just finishing college at the University of the Philippines in Los Baños when those two met. So he was a student, she was a professor. Of course, they're the same age. There's
Okay,
a disparity, the disparity there in education because of the war.
Okay.
So he was a little behind us, in his studies.
I was going to ask, what age are people typically starting college?
Oh, I don't know. It depends on how old they were when they survived the war.
Right, but just like at the time, like, or just in general, like say there was no war, is it like here in
about
the
16.
States?
16.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the educational system in the Philippines is so different from here in America. You go from kindergarten, if you're lucky, you can go to kindergarten, and then you can go to first grade to the sixth grade. And then from sixth grade, you can go to 4 years of high school.
Oh, okay.
And then you can go to college after that. So usually you would graduate at the age of 16 and then go to college.
Okay.
But during that time, also during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, I would even venture to say in the 80s, the University of the Philippines was known as the Harvard of Asia. And so we had many international students also studying at the University of the Philippines. So,
And then just so I can maybe get this, I don't know what the right word is. I guess just I'll say the setting right. It
yeah.
seems like I'm guessing then that your grandparents, like Pedro
And
and
Dolores,
Dolores, I mean, it seems like they were pretty well off.
I wouldn't say they were pretty well off.
I'm just
They
assuming
had
that from the
means. Let's just
property.
say that they had some means. They were not super wealthy, but they did have some means. They were very humble people. In fact, when I was growing up, because they had two properties in Manila, and interestingly, both properties are close to a street called Pasig Line. Pasig Line, because there's a railroad close by.
Mm-hmm.
And so Pasig Line is known for gang wars. And there's a gang there called Oxo Sigue Sigue. That's from the Spanish, Sigue Sigue means go, go, forward, forward. So that was the name of the gang. And then the other gang was called Oxo, OXO. And so they would have rumbles and wars, against each other. And the property where I lived and my grandparents lived was surrounded by squatters, shanty town. We were not in a very expensive part of the city, in the rich part of the city. We were actually in a very, I would say, lower middle class.
And I guess what I'm wondering too is just demographics wise, do most kids go on to college?
No.
At the time? No.
You have an opportunity during those days. You would have an opportunity to go to college if you were living in the Manila area. And so if you don't live in the Manila area, then you would live in what we call the provinces in the Philippines. And they're mostly, at the time, during that time, they were mostly fields, mostly farmers growing rice and other crops, fruits and vegetables, that sort, mostly rice. And so they would just work in the farm or become street vendors or just regular people with no college degree. But
so I'm thinking of then, if I'm comparing it to what I believe to be like kind of U.S. history, it'd be people are going to Manila, like to the city, I guess. So they're
Yes.
getting education and different type of lifestyle.
Yes. Shortly after the war, yeah, it was very expensive, first of all, to live in Manila during those times. You couldn't even, if you wouldn't even be able to get a ride to Manila, because we didn't have a really good railways. How would you get from the south of Luzon to the north? Or how would you even get to Manila if you're living in the other islands south of Manila? We have 7,100 islands. And at the time, at the very least, 200 other languages. So that's what's unique about the Philippines, really, is that there was really no Philippines before the Spaniards came. It was just a bunch of tribes.
That's my understanding of, yeah.
Yes, there were tribes with many languages, over 200 even languages. And in a way, that's why I say that the Spaniards did something good, in a way, because it made the Philippines unite against the Spaniards. Of course, except for the South. The South is very, very Muslim. We have many Arabs who live there. We have many Arabian words that are interspersed between the languages of the Philippines. So, for example, the word karayum, which means needle, is an Arab word. Or alak is also an Arab word, which means wine or something alcoholic. So that was what the Philippines was like decades after the war. So it was a cool thing if you lived around Manila and the suburbs and the wealthy parts of Manila. We were not in the wealthy part of Manila, but
what was the part you were in again?
It's called Santa Ana.
Oh, I guess we haven't gotten to that part of the story.
Yeah.
Let's go back to where Grandma and Grandpa met at college.
University of the Philippines.
University,
that was a little bit of what you may call during those days. It would have been a bit of a scandal, because no student should be fraternizing with a professor, even if they're the same age, because they fell in love. I guess someone.
Do you know about how old they would have been?
Let's see. They would have been. How old was my mom? 55. So she would have been maybe 20 or 21.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 21. So would he be? He was like 7 months older than her, and so someone saw them kissing, and that was reported, which caused a scandal, which caused the I don't know if she was fired or she was forced to quit, but my mom lost her job as a professor. And being a professor in the University of the Philippines campus is very, very prestigious, especially for a woman. And especially for my mother, who had sisters who were also extremely intelligent, who were also graduates of the University of the Philippines, had scholarships, and even had scholarship offers in the United States after they graduated from University of the Philippines, as did my mother. But my mother eloped. And so when they went back to Mama's parents in Bulacan to, of course, ask for forgiveness, that was not a very good scene, because from what I was told, they were made to kneel at the door to the house, and then from the door to the living room, they walked kneeling on their knees to my grandmother, who was very, very angry at the time, of course, very angry. And what I was told was she pulled my mother's earrings. Now, that may not mean anything, but at the time, women who come from means always wore earrings that were made of either diamonds or pearls or emeralds, really expensive earrings. And my mother had a pair of earrings, and she grabbed those earrings from her as a sign of, that would be kind of a sign of snatching away your royal title kind of thing, that she was up here and now she's down here. And my grandmother proceeded to beat her in front of, right beside my father. And my father tried to persuade her, while he's kneeling down, persuading her to please stop beating, Priscilla. And it was pretty bad. So my mother had to leave. She left with my father, and henceforth was, I guess, not really part of the family. Part of the family, she would be part of the family if she left my father. And so when they had a child shortly after, which would have been me, they were married in February. And so when they had me, I would have been the child of sin, right? So they did not want to accept me as their grandchild. It took a while. It took a while.
Do you know, was the objection because of grandma losing her status and job and
yes.
kind of the, okay.
That's a big part of it. A second part of it is because I hate to say this, but in the Philippines, especially during that time, there was, and this exists in any country, unfortunately, is they do have prejudice. They like Filipinos who had light skin. The colonial mentality, that would be the result of 300 years of Spanish rule. So if you are a Filipino with light skin, then you're more favored. My father also had Indian blood, East Indian blood. So he was very dark, extremely dark, and extremely handsome. He was very handsome. He had what you call an aquiline nose at the time, not the flat, wide Filipino nose, but he had a kind of a Western nose, you could say, but he was so dark. And so my grandparents didn't want my mother to marry someone dark like him.
And I wonder, and I'm just thinking out loud here, or maybe this is just a question. If it's also like, oh, you're the dark skinned Filipino, and no wonder you got my daughter in trouble. Is it that kind of prejudice, or is it?
It's that kind of prejudice. Yes, you have no right to touch my daughter because you're dark. If you're a well-educated woman, especially someone who's a scholar from the acclaimed University of the Philippines, you are expected to marry a mestizo.
And what is that again?
Mestizo? A mestizo is it's what you call in Spanish mezclado, or a mix of different races. So if you're a Filipino and then you're Spaniard, you're half Filipino and half Spaniard, then you're the ultimate mestiza. If you are Filipino and part Chinese, you would also be a mestiza because the Chinese had lighter skin. And so that would be also a mestiza. But if you're Filipino and you marry someone from the province who doesn't have any Chinese blood or European blood, then dang, sucks to be you.
So let's go back to your
Papa?
parents. Yeah, your parents are in, I forgot the name. Oh, Santa Ana?
Santa Ana.
Yeah.
Yes, they lived in my grandfather's, Pedro and Dolores. They lived in their old house, the house that they had before the war. Now, Santa Ana is very interesting because when they were bombing Manila, destroying so many nice places and cathedrals and such in the Manila area, Santa Ana was not bombed.
Mm.
And so they still had, at the time in the 1950s, they still had the houses that were built in the 1920s, 1930s that withstood the bombing of Manila. And that's where I was mostly raised, was in that house. It was a one-bedroom house.
Did Grandpa finish school?
Grandpa,
The university? De Rama?
yes, he did. He graduated
Okay.
from Silliman University. He was a teacher. And he was also a violinist. He spoke Japanese and German, as
I
well
didn't
as
know he played
Spanish.
violin.
He was a virtuoso. In fact, his teacher, who was a mestiza, Spaniard, part Spaniard, gifted him his, I don't know if he was a male or a female, but gifted him his violin. And the violin was not exactly a Stradivarius, which is, I don't know if you've heard of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Stradivarius could cost millions of dollars, but it was
Yeah.
a copy of a Stradivarius, meaning that the violin was built by students of Stradivarius. And it had the name on it. And my grandfather had that violin, and he played that violin for a long time. And I don't know where it went. Probably my father sold it, among other things. But yeah, he was a violinist. In the Philippines, you could say that during the Spanish times, you could divide the Filipinos into what they call the intelligentsia and then lo demás, or the others. The intelligentsia would be Filipinos who were educated.
Mm-hmm.
And so my grandparents on both sides, but especially my father's parents, were part of that group that they call the intelligentsia, because they spoke at least two languages, which would be their native language plus Tagalog, and they would have had to speak Spanish, and then to survive the war, Japanese.
Jeez.
And so my grandparents were multilingual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think I was meaning to ask if Grandpa De Rama, like your dad, did he finish college?
My dad did not finish college.
Oh, okay. When all this was going on with
Mama.
Grandma.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had to
Okay.
flee.
He kind of got kicked out as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a scandal.
So what did he end, or what did your parents end up doing in Santa Ana?
My father had many businesses that he tried to develop, which were mostly failed businesses. I remember at one time he owned an ice cream parlor. But my father is a very man about town type of person. He had so many friends. He would just give the ice cream for free. He would just give them away, so he wouldn't make any money.
Mm-hmm.
So same thing happened with whatever business he would start. He wouldn't make money because he would just give away money. In other words, he was a very poor businessman.
Did Grandma work?
Grandma worked. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. My mother worked as a government employee. I don't know how she got that job, but I think her dad had influence as far as that's concerned. So she worked as an analyst for the government in the, what it would be, the Wages and Commission Authority, or Office of the Wages and Commissions. She was a job analyst. I don't know what that means, but I know she worked long hours, and she also worked many, many hours of overtime. So she was, in essence, the sole provider from the time I was little. And what I remembered of my father is that he would come home drunk, and then they would fight because he lost money. So we were constantly without food, without money, because of that. It was pretty tough growing up, but there were also happy days, because we had so much freedom. We didn't have my parents to mind us, and we had our run of the house.
As far as like setup of town, like how was it, kind of like suburbia, or is it rural, or
it's
city?
very, very much city.
Okay.
But I would say it would be the slums of the city. It would be the slums.
So there's lots of housing altogether there.
Lots of housing from before the war that should be condemned, but people still lived in them, and also had their businesses on the bottom floor. Yeah, a lot of houses that were built before the war, so they were pretty old and decrepit.
How long did you live there?
I lived in Santa Ana until my second year in high school, so I would have been 14. My parents moved. That's a really good story, because my father decided that he was going to make money by demolishing the old house where we lived in. So, and then he built a 5-door apartment, or 5
units,
apartments, 5 units.
Yeah.
And we lived on the 5th unit. But while it was being built, we lived with my grandparents. So those were happy times. I remember those were happy times for me.
Which side?
My father.
Or?
We didn't have much to do with my mother's.
Oh, okay.
I did not see my grandparents growing up. I saw them maybe once in a while for Christmas, and I was always scared of them.
Which one was the one that lived to be like 100-something?
That's Inang. That would be my mother's mother, the one who pulled out her earrings.
Oh, okay. You didn't see her all that much then.
Not that much. I remember going to her house in Bulacan. That would be north of Manila. It's at the time it was like a 2-hour, 3-hour drive. So we would go to her house, but I remember feeling super uncomfortable that I would always play in the fields, where they had fruit trees. So I'd climb the trees to eat fruits, so I can be away from the house. That's how it was. But living with my other set of grandparents on my father's side, that was a great time, because my grandmother, who was active in the Eastern Star, because my grandfather Pedro was a Mason.
Okay.
And so the Eastern Star is the women's side of the Masonic, whatever you call that.
Yeah.
But it was the Masonic temple. They met at the Masonic temple. And so also they were both Protestants, Methodists. And so my grandmother often would read the Bible to me and teach me stories of Jesus. She So I knew the stories of Jesus even before I went to kindergarten. I knew all the stories, and I knew all the songs of the Protestant church that they went to. So those were pretty formative years, because I would have been 4 or 5 years old, and so it was very formative, because then I learned how to be nice, how to be gracious, how to say please. And because my grandmother did not speak Tagalog very well, she spoke to us in English.
Okay. And
Yeah.
and she was the one that spoke what did you say? Ilocano?
Ilonggo.
Ilongo.
She spoke
Okay.
Ilonggo, a little bit of Tagalog. Of course, she spoke English, and she could defend herself in Spanish. But my grandfather, Pedro, spoke more languages.
And they lived closer.
Yes, they lived. I remember walking to their house by myself.
Oh, okay. So they were in
even,
Santa
even as
Ana.
a toddler, I would walk. And it was an interesting walk, because on the way to their house, there was this big mud pit. Well, mud pit, or it was just stagnant waters. And then so that you don't get wet or you don't fall into the water, they would put slabs of wood, so that you could walk on the wood. And so it was very interesting, because every time it rained, the water would go up. There would be floods. And so it was very difficult to go to their house when there was a flood. You had to walk underwater.
Oh.
So yeah, and then of course the waters were stagnant, full of nasty stuff. So yeah, that's how it was, going back and forth to my grandfather's house.
Okay.
Until my father built that apartment.
Right. Okay, and that happened when you were like 14, and then so you moved in basically down the street.
Yeah, because my father lost the apartment complex.
The 5-unit place?
Huh?
The 5-unit place that he was
making? Yes, he lost it because he had to get a loan to build it. Well, what's his collateral? Of course, the house and lot itself. And when he couldn't pay it, because my father just spent. So we lost it. We lost the unit. And so we had to find an apartment to rent, this time in Quezon City, close to my high school.
How far is that from where you were?
At the time, if you go from Santa Ana to Quezon City, you ride the bus. It could be an hour and a half or so drive on rough terrain.
So did grandma keep her job during all this time?
Yes. Okay. In fact, she got promoted and promoted and promoted to the point where, when President Ferdinand Marcos was first elected to be president of the Philippines, my mother started to get promoted, mainly because my father, while he was going to the University of the Philippines, was very good friends with the powers that be, by the sons and daughters of the wealthy Filipinos, who were the movers and shakers at the time. In fact, my godfather, and no one would be impressed by this, but maybe your Filipino listeners would be impressed. But my godfather was Eduardo Cuanco, or Danding Cuanco. He's one of the richest men in the Philippines, and a very good friend of Marcos. And then also, my other godfather was Joseph Madamba, who was the head of the International Rice Development, which was where all the Asian countries went to develop different qualities of rice, and so
like rice science,
yes. So, which is really sad, because we used to be rice exporters, you know, and now we're not. We have to import rice from the countries we taught.
Really? Huh.
Yes. So
Well,
like Thailand is now prolific.
So were these godfathers, were they like grandpa's pals from school?
Yes,
Is that what it
very
was?
close friends from
Yeah.
after the war. And not only that, my godmother, so I had two godparents. This would mean, you know, when you're christened in the Catholic Church, they would be they call them godfather. In Spanish, they call them padrinos. They would be part of your family. They would be responsible for your development, religious development. And so then my godmother was the daughter of the famous Guillermo Tolentino, who created the most important monuments in the Philippines.
You know which ones?
To this day. Well, the monument of the University of the Philippines main campus in Quezon City called the Oblation, where there's a man, you know, with his arms outstretched looking at the sky, totally naked. Oblation, of course, means plea,
Right.
you know, a plea to God, and hopefully for more knowledge, for more grace. And so that is the statue that will invite you into the University of the Philippines. He also did some the Bonifacio Monument. Doesn't mean anything to Americans, but it's a very historical monument in the Philippines. Everybody knows the Bonifacio Memorial. He was one of the Filipino greats. I was actually close to Guillermo Tolentino. He would teach me how to sculpt, teach me how to draw, teach me how to write in the Tagalog way. It's called baybayin. He taught me many, many things about the ancient Filipinos. And he was also a spiritista, which means that he would hold seances in his house. That would scare me to death.
Yeah.
But he was very loving and very kind. And so my father had all these influential friends who in turn put my mother in very high offices in the government, to the point where she became the liaison between the Minister of Natural Resources and anybody who wants to do any kind of business with the Philippines as far as natural resources is concerned. That would mean pearl farms. That would mean oil or mines. So it was a very wealthy ministry. So my mother was in there. She was getting paid pretty good money. That's when we started to accumulate some money. It was after Marcos became president, and my father was also working for the Minister of Natural Resources. I do not specifically want to discuss what he did in details, but nevertheless, they were illegal stuff, but he made pretty good money.
Yeah, I know Jordan sent me, for those listening, Jordan is my brother, older brother. Jordan sent me some letters that Grandpa had written to Grandma. I guess he came to the States to do some sort of tour.
Yes. He was sent here to Colorado. On
Yeah.
agrarian reform. My father was in charge of agrarian reform.
Okay.
So that
I know just a little bit about, like, I actually didn't know about Marcos until I asked you who did Grandpa work for, and you know, you texted me and I was like, oh, I'm gonna Google Marcos, and I was like, whoa. But oh man,
Marcos
what was I just gonna say?
a really, really good president in the beginning.
I was gonna say, yeah, I saw a big thing of his was like rice reforms, unifying the rice trade, and
yes, and those were good times.
Those
were really good times, because the Philippines saw a lot of improvement, and we were even competing with other Asian nations. Of course, it was also crazy because you could say we were also under the influence of the United States, as they tried to make deals with the Filipino government so they could make their own money.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to do an episode on Marcos because I have some of the transcripts of conversations and the letters that were going back and forth between the embassy at the Philippines and DC when, during when martial law was declared and what was going on. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of it was about, well, this might not be good, but let's just watch our business interests in this, this, and this. And seemed to be very driven by, as long as business is okay, then we don't care.
Yes, as long as that's true. That's true. I think the Philippines really had a good round while Marcos was president until he started getting sick. Things started to turn around because other people who had money started to try to buy influence. And you can buy influence from the government so easily. Like my mom would say, well, some German company wanted a logging concession. Of course, that's part of natural resources, loggings, right? Logging concessions. And my mom would say, oh, yeah, they wanted a logging concession and they wanted to give me something so that I could put their papers on the top or expedite the request or whatever. So, yeah, you made money that way too. Not particularly proud of it, but that's how it was, and it still is that way.
Yeah, that's what I hear. So is that when you ended up going to Philippine Science? When you moved to Quezon City?
The year before we moved to Quezon City. Yes, that was I went to this really good school too. It's called the same school that my father went to, Philippine Christian College, Union Elementary School. Class of 1969. I went through first grade to seventh grade at that school, and it's a Methodist school.
Is that like a feeder? Is that like would you consider it a feeder to Philippine Science or?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
No, because the Philippine Christian colleges were mostly known for they were what you call normal colleges, teaching colleges. So if you go to Philippine Christian College, you would go there to be able to teach. So I wouldn't say that they were so good in math or sciences, but they were extremely good teaching students how to speak good English. So most of the graduates of Philippine Christian College elementary school were extremely good writers in English. But then again, it was a private school. So it costs a lot of money to go to school there.
The elementary?
Elementary school, yes. In fact, during the early days before my parents started working for the government, my father couldn't pay our tuition. And in order to take your quarterly exams, or I can't remember what it's called now, is it half term? Because I think in the US you have 4 terms or four terms. We have 2 semesters. And so in order to take the exam, you need to have a permission slip. Permission slip, there's 2 colors. One is blue and one is white. If it's blue, that means you paid for the year and you don't have any problem, you can take the test. But if you don't have the white permit, you cannot take the test because that means that you haven't paid for that semester. So oftentimes I'd be outside the classroom waiting for my father so that I could take the exam, waiting for him to pay, you know. So that's how I took the exams. Always my father would come and pay just in the nick of time, in time for me to take my my exams. So we weren't the cool kids because we had no money. We weren't anybody, and many of the students who went there were old money. But that's early on. I could see that there was a difference. There's a difference between students who had money and had influence, and also the students who were lighter skinned. They were always the favorite.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did not have light skin. My skin was not light enough. So I was not the favorite of any teacher. And plus, I wasn't part of the wealthy family, so I was nobody. So I finally decided that no matter how I try at school, I will never have I would never place in, because in the Philippines, being in top 10 student is important. In fact, they have what we call valedictorians who graduate from elementary school. And I wanted to be valedictorian or salutatorian or even third honor. But no, I couldn't be third, I couldn't be fourth, I couldn't be fifth.
How did Philippine Science get on the radar? Because I will say, I did an episode and I talked about how you went to Philippine Science High School.
Yeah.
And a couple of people commented, they're like, oh, wow, she must be really smart.
Well, when I was in 7th grade, there was an announcement. And the teacher said, will the following students please meet in the library? So they called the students, and I was one of them. I didn't know what the heck was going on. But we went to the library. Apparently, they chose the top 15 or top 10 students, and apparently I'm one of them, to take the exam for Philippine Science High School. And out of the 10, I think there were half of us who passed the first screening exam. Now, nationally, that would have been 5,000 students called from all the elementary schools nationwide. So it would be the top 10 in every elementary school, graduating elementary school. So out of the 5,000, they called 500 students out of that 5,000.
Oh,
and
wow.
one of them was me. And so we took the second screening exam, which was even harder. And of course, it's Philippine Science High School. So you can imagine that more than half of the tests would include math and science. So it wasn't particularly like what you knew about science, but it was more like if you understood the question being asked.
The thought process.
The thought process. So it wasn't what you knew, but how you thought. And so out of the 500, there were 140 of us who made it. And there was only one other student from my school, elementary school, who made it. So we were the only two.
Was that someone, would I recognize that person's name or?
Lillian, her name was Lillian.
Okay.
No, you wouldn't recognize her because you didn't know her growing up.
And when you were doing those, is it like, when we're taking tests here, you have practice exams and
No. I didn't know what Philippine Science High School was. I'd never heard of it before. The only time I heard of it was when I passed the first exam and they said, Christy, you're going to take the second screening. What? I had already enrolled in the University of the Philippines high school program. At the time, there were two high schools in the University of the Philippines. One was the UP Preparatory School and one was UP High School. Now, the UP Preparatory School was above a scale above the regular high school, and I made it there. I was already enrolled when I found out that I was admitted to Philippine Science High School. Of course, I dropped everything and moved to Quezon City to Philippine Science High School, stayed in a dorm for a year because it was far from Santa Ana.
Do you remember what your parents said when you passed those exams, or like what their reaction was?
It.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe I was that smart. Because I couldn't place in elementary school. Imagine the valedictorian didn't make it, you know, and here's Christy. I think I was number 7 or number 8 in the graduating class, and I made it.
Yeah.
So I had the last laugh, you know. So I never really thought I was smart, especially after the first year in Philippine Science where they were teaching us algebra, and we were like 12, 13-year-old kids, and some were even 11, like Shane.
Yeah, I remember him saying that.
Yeah, and I didn't know how to solve for X. I didn't even know what X meant. They said X is a number, and I'm like, wait a minute, X is a alphabet. No, it's not a number.
I beg to differ.
I beg to differ. 1, 2, 3, those are numbers. X and Y, they're not numbers. And I nearly lost my scholarship, which is devastating because, you know, with the scholarship, you are paid by the government 140 pesos a month to study. Now, 104, just for context, $140, 140 pesos would be equivalent to about $140. It was a lot of money. It was a lot of money. I mean, 140 pesos would be pretty good money for someone extremely poor, you know. That would be big money for them. So that was something big, you know, for a lot of us to be paid to study. We had free books, we had free tuitions, we didn't have to worry about anything. All you had to do was get a B. If you get a B- or a C, you're kicked off the program. So out of 140 who started, there were only 109 who graduated.
Wow.
So even then it was pretty competitive, and I thought that I wasn't as smart as the rest because I didn't know X was a number.
Right.
But after some of my friends in the first year taught me, you know, Christy, X represents a number, but it's not a number. And they explained to me what it was and how to solve for X. Pretty much everything came easy after that. I didn't have any more problems, even if I was scared to death every year that I would be kicked off the program.
Yeah, well, Mom, I actually have to going to get Dexter.
Go get Dexter. We can continue another day. Okay?
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Bye,
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.